Hello. Taylor, I think we need for you to go ahead and start the webinar. I'm not sure. But if this is already started, I wanted to welcome you all. My name's Alicia Wong, and I serve here at Lifeway as a women's ministry specialist. I wanted to welcome you. For those of you who are first time, we're so excited that you're here joining us. Um, I do want to share a couple of announcements before we get started, just several things that I wanted to talk about. And as I will introduce ourselves in a little bit. We have some giveaways for this coming month for March. We have 2 tickets to You Lead, which is $158 value. So excited. We have a free ebook as well. Please use the promo code, which is Ministry to Women. So those are free to you, and there's a link that Taylor has for you in the chat. And also, we have a couple of You Leads that are coming your way. San Diego, for those of you who are in Southern California, please join us there. We have also in April, we have another You Lead at Chicago. There's a blog post that's also there and available. That's called Leading Well, which is specifically for women's ministry leaders. Ladies, we just have tons of stuff, okay? I was like, I may do like commercials in between or something like that as we do introductions. But so excited though for all of these products that we have. We have a Bible study that's coming out soon that's called Live Free by Elizabeth Woodson, that's on the book. On Galatians, we have Lifeway Women Academy, which is offering an ethics course. That's a new release that's coming out. So those of you who are wondering about these hard questions and how do we deal with ethical issues, that would be a great class for you. We have a symposium in which those are for like Bible nerds, those who want to study more at New Orleans. The symposium is at New Orleans, and we only have that every 2 years. So those are several things that are happening that are coming up for this summer and this spring. And I do want to share and ask if the panelists would also share a little bit about themselves. Know that we are going to have a chat, which some of you are already taking advantage of, and I'm so excited that you are doing that and using the chat here. There is while you may have questions, you want to use on the bottom of your Zoom link, there's a Q&A question and answer kind of button for you. That is where you want to post any questions that you have during our discussion, our webinar discussion, because the chat sometimes goes so fast that we won't get to see all of the questions. But we are so excited that you are all here. We want to make sure that your needs are going to be met on this very, very important topic of how to grow, right, as a leader. I think we all need that, and we need that encouragement. And we have brought alongside panelists, several panelists that I love for them to introduce themselves. And for those of you um, who don't know, I am from Southern California, born and raised, and I have been serving as a professor over women's ministry probably for the last 20 some odd years now. So wow, it's been so long. But I have been loving it, and those are my areas of ministry. And I'm going to turn it over and have our panelists share a little bit about who they are and where they're from and where they serve currently.
Well, I am Casey Merrifield. I live in Elk City, Oklahoma, so right between Amarillo and Oklahoma City. And I have served in full-time ministry, doing student ministry early on in my ministry experience. I now own a company called Connection Worldwide, where we really are focused on leadership development and how do we create a culture where people matter, and we really have a strong focus on how to grow as a healthy leader. So I'm excited to be with you. I have a husband, and some bird dogs and a pug, so I'm very exciting.
And hello, ladies. My name is Heather Johnson. I am a native of Pittsburgh, Pennsylvania. I currently live in New Orleans, Louisiana, with my husband of 29 plus years. And we have three teenage children and one young adult son. I started my journey in ministry serving women at the local church, serving at a church where my husband was the pastor. I enjoy serving with the Women's Ministry Life team, doing some speaking and some writing and teaching the Bible in my local church, and serving at New Orleans Seminary as the assistant director of the Thrive Ministry Wives program. And excited for a new journey, adding to a life experience. My husband was just elected the 10th president of Louisiana Christian University. So I will step into the role of the president's wife. And so I just love serving women in any capacity God allows.
Right. And maybe Michelle, if you can just share a little bit of yourself, we may need to have you jump in for today.
Yeah, hey
Um,
everybody. We're having a little bit of technical difficulties. Don Stevens is supposed to be on with us from the church at Brook Hills in Birmingham, Alabama, but we've got some glitches there happening. And I always jump in anyway. So I'm so happy to be back with you. I'm Michelle Hicks and serve as the manager for the magazine devotional team with Lifeway Women, and kind of just do all the things with Lifeway Women that they'll let me do. I love it so much, and serve as a trainer along with a lot of these ladies for Lifeway. And so I've been on the You Lead webinar since the get-go. I love being in the chat with you all. So keep talking, and I'm going to keep chatting back with you. Okay.
Yeah, and I'm so sorry, guys. I forgot to tell you all, please introduce yourselves and chat if you haven't done so. I've been seeing that pop in here and there, but I try to leave my chat off because there's so many different things, so many moving parts for this webinar. But we are here to really focus on this very important topic when we were thinking of things that we want to discuss as leaders in women's ministry, of how to go about growing as leader. That is such a challenge, to have to be excited and passionate and to grow and to continue to so I'm a learner. Like, I took degrees upon degrees just because I love to learn, but not everyone's built that way. Not everyone processes that way. So I have asked several of our panelists to just share a little bit, if they will. Um, how do you grow as a leader? And then just share, before you share that, say like what area of field specifically, and how, whether it's like marketplace for Casey, Heather for you as a pastor's wife, and then Michelle for you, and even and women's ministry leader. If Dawn can come on, we would love for her to share from that perspective, but we'll all pitch in for that area. So Casey, if you will just share a little bit, like for you, what is helpful for you?
Well, first of all, I think how I'm going to address this will be ministry or marketplace, because one of the things I think about specifically, just from a very broad perspective that can get really into more specific details, is the core of a leader is three things. It's your skill set. So if you're in ministry or marketplace, are you growing in your skill set? Are you attending you leads? Are you attending different things where you can be better at what you do, whether it's ministry or marketplace? The next thing is emotional intelligence. How do you connect with others? How do you read people? How do you really know how to read a room so that you can connect specifically? And then the third thing that really ties into both of them is your personality intelligence. Do you know your personality and how your personality tendencies connect both with your skill set and your ability to connect with others? And more particularly, the question I always like to ask at every day and in every engagement with other people is, do you know what it's like to be on the other side of you? And how can you grow in a manner where we're building bridges, A, to the gospel, whether ministry or marketplace, or are we really giving a good impression of who Jesus is? Even in church settings or ministry settings, sometimes our ability to connect with others, we self-sabotage unintentionally because we're not growing in those abilities to connect well with people in a really healthy way. So I would say the core of a leader is all three of those. So my first thing is, which area do I need to focus on to grow?
Yeah, for me, when I think about how do I continue to grow as a leader, one thing is just avoiding isolation, right? Sometimes we can get busy in the work of leading, hitting the challenges, trying to work through that calendar that you've planned, and you just forget. And so I would say read, listen, and attend. Read books, listen to podcasts, attend events so that you can continually stretch in new areas, but also so that you can get some fresh ideas in things that you're already doing. The other thing I would say, and that would be that comments for all ministry aspects. For ministry wives in particular, I would encourage you to commit to grow where you are. As a ministry wife, you don't always get to pick the places that God calls you. You know, God has called my husband places. I don't get the call. Like the Lord doesn't call me on the side and say, Heather, where would you like to go? What would you like to do? And so you may find yourself serving in places that you did not choose. And if you are serving in the church, you may do something that's not your like passion or deep gifting, but it needs to be done. And so to the glory of God, you do it. And so I just say that whatever season you're in, even if you didn't choose it or lay it out or it's not your plan, commit to growing where you are.
Heather, I'm just going to throw a resource that's going to be in your show notes that kind of tags onto that. A friend of mine wrote a book a couple of years ago called Chasing Donkeys, and he is in ministry, and he just talks about that specific thing. Like when David was out in the field being a shepherd, it was this whole idea of that's what he called him to in that season. So just a quick plug for a resource that you will see in your show notes.
Excellent.
And I would encourage you, those of you who are in chat, what are some ways that you're growing? And like, how do you grow as leader? What are some things? And Michelle, you can give us a summation a little bit. But one thing I know when we were trying to prepare for this webinar, one of those was really, Don had mentioned like just staying in community, that is so key for us to have people speaking into us that have permission actually to speak into us, because many times we tend to surround people that are like us, okay? Or we tend to do just hear those that are positive, but we kind of put away, 'cause sometimes there's a lot of negativity that comes at us in
Mm,
leadership. But we also want people who love us and know us, but can also speak into us. I think
yeah.
that's really big. And the other thing was also being able to be in small groups that you do not lead. So I'm borrowing some things from Don. So Don, while you're trying to deal with these technical difficulties, I'm sharing your part, but also those were things that I feel as well, being in a small group that you yourself do not lead. So your husband can lead it, or another lady that's older or younger that's more spiritually, more, and sometimes they may not as be spiritually mature, but they're in leader, being able to respect that authority and leadership too. Take some retreat time, that's super helpful for me, to take half a day or even like two
Yeah.
hours where it's you and God at the coffee shop, where it's just focused, phones are off, everything is off, and it's just you and God, and you're having a come to Jesus meeting with Jesus, okay? Where you let him be able to speak into you, and just taking that time, because I know, I mean, I was just sharing with the ladies here on the panel, like my job, because I'm doing a job and a half, I'm still serving at Gateway Seminary part-time, working full-time at Lifeway. And so I'm like meeting boom, 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 and life can get so busy that if you don't even take that like 15 minutes or half an hour or even a quarterly retreat, you can get to a point where everything is just on autopilot, and that can really stifle any growth that you can have. And so, those are some things to consider. I know for me too, one other thing, and that Don had also mentioned, was really growing in times of suffering, like being
Yeah.
able to redeem the hard stuff that are happening and really take a step back and go, okay, well, I did not enjoy this season, or I did not enjoy what just happened to me in this situation. What is it that through the suffering that I can really see God's hand and God's people at work,
Mhm.
you know? And so really being able go ahead, jump in, Heather. I see you
No,
go.
I was gonna say, just adding on to that suffering or struggles, I've often found that when any woman serving and leaving in any capacity hits that road, like where something happens you cannot control, it really forces you to lean on God. And so sometimes I kind of have to get out of myself and say, what is God showing me in this difficult time? And the other thing, as a woman serving in ministry, like you can grow in how you support other people. So you're going to lead people who are going through seasons of suffering, and you will grow as a leader when you can serve them well and help them through those difficult times.
Right.
There's some great things in the chat, Alicia. If you don't mind, I just want to bullet point a few
Yes, please
things.
do. Please.
Donna in Virginia said, of course, meditating and memorizing
Yeah.
scripture to make sure, making sure you're in the word and you are filling yourself with the word. And kind of along with that, somebody else had put something about making sure, I think it was Anne, making sure she's listening to really solid teaching when we are teaching so much or leading so much, to make sure we're actually sitting under really solid teaching and letting the Lord pour into us through that. There's some great ideas on here. Elizabeth had said observing other leaders and
Mhm.
looking at what she admires and learn from them, and uh, of course reading books on things that she needed to grow in. Stacia, I hope I said that right. Networking with local leaders, uh, and actually keeping an eye out for other local women's ministries and the events they might have. Look for ways to gather ideas and collaborate, and that just helps with your growth in leadership as well. For your women. Lots on taking advantage of networking and educational opportunities. So some really great stuff in the chat. If everybody make sure you scroll
Mhm.
through that.
And
Right.
I would add to what you read about networking and peers, like developing relationships with peers where you learn as you grow and develop relationships. I think that's another way to develop community, because if we're peers, we make mistakes together, we help each other grow. And I have found over time, watching my peers get elevated and being able to watch them go to new heights and help take me to new heights has always been a blessing. So, yes, networking and community and having those people that you can stay connected with.
Mm. Wow, those are all great responses and so helpful. And I think Casey also mentioned something earlier that was really key point, like emotional intelligence, your personality intelligence, all of those things.
Yeah.
So I think putting that simply, if I can, is really doing maybe a checking in of your emotional, mental, physical, and spiritual health. Like we know in our minds that we are supposed to go for a physical checkup. Now, not all of us do it, and I know many of you know, but it is so helpful for us to maintain that physical health, for us to have that 1 year checkup. Well, likewise, spiritually, the same thing, mentally, the same thing, right? Emotionally, right now, a very popular thing is for people to have counselors in their back pocket, right? As opposed to really using counselors to help them grow emotionally and to help them grow in those areas. So we need to kind of rethink that aspect of just checking in, you know, how are we doing in all four of these areas? Because we want to lead, okay, our ministry holistically, right? Because we're a whole person, we're not just parts, although sometimes we feel like that with the many hats that we all wear. But we really want to be sensitive to how are we doing? Are we having those check-ins? Are you meeting with people who check in on you spiritually? who does the check, hey, how are you doing with your time with God? How are you doing in spiritual discipline areas? How are you doing? And that's super helpful to have that. And so I think number of you mentioned networking. That's really the networking part of um, accountability. And God's word says that very clearly about casting our burdens, right, onto Him, but also to bear one another's burden. So much so that we are helping one another grow in those areas. Another area that I wanted us to hit on, and this is a question I'm going to pose to all the participants as well, is really, um, what are some obstacles to growth that you have found, whether it is mentally, whether it's emotionally, whether it's physically, whether it's spiritually? What are some of those obstacles to growth? And of course, this webinar is focused majority on spiritually, right? And of course, and even mentally for us to be growing and thinking more theologically, biblically sound. We want that for our webinar. But so what are some of those obstacles? You can put those in the chat, okay? I see Kay Herta out there saying, my flesh. It is so true, right? Thank you for kicking us off with that. Sorry, that just popped into my little bubble that you have it on Zoom. But
When
yeah.
I think about that, and it has already been said by several people, even on the chat, is like, we don't grow in isolation. And Heather started off with that, right? So if we're going to cultivate the right relationships, we have to be around people who are not enamored by our positions.
Mm,
We have to be around people who are going to be real with us and we can be real with them. One thing that I learned, and it was because it was really modeled for me. So this is something we need to model for other people. We've already said it, vulnerability,
mm,
but that place of vulnerability is creating, like, find a circle of people that you're going to model this for, and then let them be that for you. But there's 3 questions that I learned at my church in Dallas years ago that I regularly ask people, and we ask each other. But one, as Kay said, how are we feeding our flesh? So, what are the things that the enemy is really trying to creep into our life that are going to really disqualify us if we're not careful? And I'll just say this because everybody knows it, but the church has not been a good place for us to confess sin. It
mm,
should be the place where we confess sin, but we haven't created an environment in a really healthy way to say it, we're all sinners. Let's just call what's eating at us, right? And say it, and then encouraging people. So what's feeding your flesh? And then what are you doing to feed your spirit? Like those spiritual disciplines of worship and memorization, Bible memorization, all of those things. So how are you feeding your spirit? And then 3, how are you feeding others? That idea of how are we now taking what God's doing and transforming us and giving it away? So I think those are really 3 good questions to ask people, and to let them ask you, and then be really honest about them. But I think somebody said this in the chat as well. You don't find these relationships on accident. You have to cultivate them and intentionally model it and let other people do this for you. So anyway, that's kind of what I think as we think about the obstacles are, we're fearful of being really known,
Mm.
and our self-preservation gets in the way. So if we will cultivate those relationships where we can be known, and I grew up in a pastor's house, being known was scary because people would weaponize your weakness, and we gotta not weaponize people's weakness and invite Christ to be the strength.
Amen. Well said. When I think about obstacles to growth, was kind of subtle. When I first came into ministry to women, I was serving at the local church. My husband had asked me to start to kind of pick up the women's ministry role. Now, the side note is I was like 10 months pregnant. That means I was very close to the end, very close to the end. And I can remember my first meeting I led, I was standing in front of a podium and I kept bumping it, the baby kept bumping into the podium, and I'm thinking, why am I doing this now? But we do it when God calls. But what I did in that season was I led with everything that I had, like everything that I knew, everything that I could learn, everything, every truth I knew from scripture, I did it. An invisible obstacle that I didn't know was there was one of just not knowing, of ignorance, of not having additional training beyond what I knew. And so, what I did well. But when I studied and learned, my first class that I took in women's ministry leadership blew everything out of the water. It took all the best that I had and opened up the doors because it showed me other options. And so I think for me, sometimes an invisible barrier or obstacle can just be lack of knowledge, that you haven't seen everything, you haven't done everything, you haven't experienced anything, and look for those opportunities to grow. The other one with fear, I'm going to add to what Casey said, is fear and doubt, that imposter syndrome that we talk about, that we step into something or we don't step into it, we avoid it. We try not to lead in those ways or those spaces because we're fearful that we're going to be found out, that we're not as good as people think that we are. And so you just have to surround yourself with people who to say, yes, in yourself you're weak, but in Christ you're strong. And you can do this if you hold on to him.
And I see that Dawn is with us, even though her name says Catherine Inman, which we love. Those of you who've been watching webinars know that Catherine has always been a part of our webinars incognito, and now Taylor's doing that as well. So Dawn, Michelle already shared your background, a little bit of what you do at Brook Hills. So if you want to just jump on to the answer to this questions, what are some obstacles to growth? And I shared your answers about the one earlier, by the way.
Okay. And I'm trying to manage all this, and I've lost my notes somewhere. They're around here. But one thing is just time, is very hard, especially if you're a working mom and volunteering in ministry, or you are working on a church staff with children. And so here's a little tip that worked for me when my son was a toddler. He came to the weekday education program here with me, and I dropped him at one end of the building and I went to the other and parked. And I just had my quiet time right there in the car. That little pocket they put in cars, that's what it's for, is to leave your Bible and your devotional and a journal. And I just use that little bit of pocket of quiet time because that's our lifeline, is our time with God. And it may look different in different seasons of your life, but I just want to encourage you to think about how it can look right now for you. Where's the time and a place I can do that works in your day, whenever it works in your day. It's just very important. So that's the one nugget to remember.
That is so good. And Michelle, is there something from chat that we need to pull up or discuss? I don't
You
want to
know
miss.
what? There are so many great things here, and just enlisting prayer partners to help you during those times. I mean, there's so, everybody struggles with busyness and time. We only have 24 hours in a day, and I think when you're a leader, especially, you want to do so much more than maybe a human can do. And so that's one of the big challenges of remembering our humanity. Remember that we are human and that we do have to have rest in addition to the ways that we serve and the ways we lead. Um, but so many great, great suggestions. You have to be feeding yourself spiritually before you can feed anybody else. And so those were just some of the really just top of mind, big view. And at times being vulnerable and authentic. I think Amber put this in, being authentic and vulnerable, and allow people to help you when you are really struggling with a lot of obstacles or a lot of things on your plate.
Right. Again, stop letting that people speak into your life, right? That love you and care for you, but are also spiritually mature and strong, super helpful, right? And that they come from different spheres. Casey, you said there are three questions. Can you repeat those three questions again to ask yourself as you're dealing with obstacles?
Sure. How are you feeding your flesh? How are you feeding your spirit? And how are you feeding others? So
Okay.
flesh, spirit, others. And how are you feeding that? And man, if you're doing regular check-ins with people weekly, right, the list should not get carried away, right? If we go 6 months and wait to ask those questions, then man, we could have a laundry list of both or all, right?
Right.
But I think the point is that we've all mentioned, who are the people that you're going to let hear into every corner of your life and help you clear out the cobwebs.
Mm.
When I was doing my doctoral work, and the topic was just how do we confront sin in the local church, one of the things that continued to come up is people don't want to be confronted on anything, but mostly because we've been very punitive with people's sin rather than leaving the 99 like Jesus did and go after the one and restoring them. So as we invite people into our lives, we have to model grace for the people who are not getting it right.
Mm.
And we also have to let people extend grace to us when we're not getting it right, and do so in a way that we can be vulnerable, authentic, honest. James 5:16 says, confess your sins one to another so that you may be healed. I think it's been horribly taught in the church that if it's a private sin, you confess it only to God.
Mm.
We need to confess the areas the enemy is trying to take us out.
Mhm.
And the way we grow as a leader is to keep a short account of the things that the enemy's trying to take us out and tell people so that we can then walk in community back to health and well-being as a leader and just as a person. We're all people who
Right.
struggle. So
Right. And I love that fact all of you, three of you have brought in this whole idea of who are the people? Who are the people? And so my next question would be something similar to that, which is how do you cultivate those people or relationships that can really help you then to grow, that will ask you the hard questions, that will lovingly, full of grace, be able to help you through whether you're making some wrong choices or sinning or whatever the case may be. How do you cultivate those relationships? And we talked a lot about that even in our previous webinars about these relationships that we need, this community that we so desperately need. How do you, each of you, do that in your spheres of influence? How do you do it on those of you who are on chat? So that's a question that's thrown out to everyone as well. So
Alicia, I'll just give a quick example. About a year and a half ago, my husband and I started leading a small group of young adult singles. We were both 39 when we married, so we were single for a very long time. And so we started this life group with these young adults. And so when I would get with the girls, I would say, hey, there's 3 questions we're going to try to ask each other regularly: the feeding your flesh, your soul, and your and others. And about a year and a half into us having this small group, one of the young adults at dinner one night with just the girls made the comment, I've got to tell y'all something I've been struggling with and I'm terrified to tell you. But after she did, I was so grateful. I said, thank you for sharing that with us. And she said, well, we're always asking each other questions, and I've never known if I could fully trust you with the hard parts. And now I know I can, because you have continued to model for me what it means to say, this is an area of weakness. So what I would say is leaders go first. You have to model authenticity and vulnerability with people that you're even building and establishing trust with. But I would say you have to be very discerning on when you can start that and with whom. And so you don't lay it all out for everybody to hear the first time you meet someone, but you do slowly build trust with people and know that when it's a trustworthy relationship, then you can go there. And so but you have to model it. So you have to create the right environment for people to know that that's a real place to do that.
Don, as you've served for many years, which is a very good thing, by the way, in women's ministry, right? As a leader for over 20 something years or 30. Are we going over 30 now?
27 this summer.
27 years. How do you build that community? Because you're like top, right? Like you have been serving, people look up to you for leadership. How do you build that community that helps you to continue to grow as a leader in your position, your situation?
Yeah, I've just been blessed. The Lord's brought both a younger woman who's now 20 years younger than me and an older woman who's almost 20 years older than me into my life, both in women's in ministry roles. And so they have just been vital. So I would encourage you, who is someone older and who is someone younger that you can have in your life, because the younger women bring fresh ideas and energy. They're engaged with a totally different generation than you are. And older women, of course, bring wisdom, experience, and they're also connected to a different generation than you are. And so I would just encourage that elder and younger women. And then
Give an example for you, like where you are at your church right now. I love what you shared about Ashley.
Oh, so the younger woman, Ashley, works with me. Yeah. So she works in young adult ministry, but she helps with women's ministry planning and strategy and vision. So, yeah, she just is a good one to sharpen me and, ask questions. And we're friends as well as ministry partners. And so that's been a huge blessing for me.
Right. And so that I think for someone who's been serving in ministry for a long time, or who are on the older side where people tend to look up to, I think it requires a lot of humility on our part to say, hey, we want to learn and to be challenged by those who are younger than us too, and to be able to have a multitude of godly, spiritually mature voices speak into our lives. Okay. I think that is so crucial. I know for me, having been in ministry for so long, a lot of my spiritual friends from seminary, when I went to seminary, we walked along the same path. Missionary friends that I served alongside with overseas are still friends today. And I have, for me, a group of women that I went to seminary. So I've known them for over 20 years now. Um, that we will pray for one another. We have a prayer chat and accountability. And they are the ones that I'm like, hey, I'm really struggling right now spiritually. They are people that I can be super honest with, you know, and they'll say, all right, we're on it. We're praying for you. And it's a commitment to pray for one another. I have some college girlfriends that I've known for over 30 years. They were part of discipling me, so being able to find those communities at work, in your local church, within your family, within your friend groups, I think you need those accountability in all of those different areas and aspects of your life. Super helpful.
And
Heather,
I would add to that as a leader, like you mentioned, really great
mhm.
places to pull your friendships, but then also maintaining your community. The fact that because we are busy, we have to be intentional. And how that's kind of played out for me with some friends that I have, it's like, let's plan a time to talk. Or I sent a message to a friend lately. I said, when are good times in your life rhythm to talk? Because depending on how you're serving and leading in ministry, like I didn't realize this. I had a great friend. We served. Her husbands went to seminary together. They both served in the local church. And then when my husband was called to pastor, my schedule took on a whole different level. And so, they had a vacation. It was a holiday. They were free at Christmas. Well, Christmas, the pastor's not going anywhere. And so we had to really communicate, when are you free? When are you available? Let's make time to talk. So you have to be intentional to cultivate that garden of friendship to keep it growing.
Mm. Michelle, any specific thing that stood out? No? Always good stuff. I know. I hear you.
There's so much, and it's really good. But different people have really talked about different mentors that they've had in their life that have been really a blessing. Having people that are going to be praying for you. Um, uh, and then there was one question that we'll get to here in a bit related to strategic growing as a strategic leader and thinker, but we'll wait till that. But Whitney just summed it up here. Intentional is a really important word. It may be overused at times, but being intentional. Um, Sometimes the Lord brings those people into our lives, and other times they're there, but we're not paying attention. And so we need to be intentional to notice those people that could be those encouragers in our growth and accountability partners.
Yeah, and that really leads us actually into the next part of like being intentional in using redeeming those opportunities and situations in which God is growing us. And so I also threw out this one question and got really great response with a panelist is, as we talk about relationships that can help us grow, what about those who have authority over us and those who we have authority over? Okay, so people over us, people that are under us. Okay, how can we allow them to influence our growth that would be very beneficial in a spiritually encouraging way? And Don, I know like for me, when I'm getting feedback from someone who's superior, it could easily put me in a very defensive mode, right? So when we're getting feedback, or we are so afraid, we may have personalities where we're so afraid to give feedback to someone else. But those feedbacks and those conversations are so important for us to grow in our areas of ministry and even personally, right? And so Don, you had a really wonderful example.
Yeah, I just think none of us really know what it's like to live with us or work with us or minister with us. Um, and so, and we don't know how we come across in times of stress, maybe, or worry or anxiety. And so, the pastor I work under, um, and work with, he just mentioned to me, he said, I really can't tell when you're stressed. You don't really show it a lot. But he said, one way is, and he shared with me how I showed when I was stressed. And he said, you just might want to be aware of that and how that comes across to other people, um, which I had never really thought of that. Because again, I can't know what I'm like on the other side. And so, very helpful. And, over the years, I've worked with him, gosh, 12 years this fall. Um, there's been a couple of 3 times he said, "Hey, I just want to mention something. You might remember, you might notice this more," and just very nice. But that's what we all do. We do it with our children. It can be harder with people we work with, but it really is helpful. And I do now think a second time when I know I'm in more of those stressful situations.
I
Right.
love that language. You might want to notice that more. It's such an inviting way to give someone feedback to say, you'll see evidence if you just kind of look a little bit closer. I like that.
And lovingly doing so, right, Heather, as we communicate feedback. So when you're receiving it, it's so helpful when people, the person who's doing it is doing it out of love and they're doing it in a graceful manner, and so therefore it propels us then to do that for other people because feedback is necessary. Some of us, like my personality is very avoidant, like I don't want any conflict. So therefore I will not share with you any feedback. If it's positive, I'll share it. But if it's negative, I don't want to share it, because I don't want to be like the bad guy. And so, but that's not helpful to the kingdom. It's not helpful to that person at all. But I need to lovingly be able to share it so that they feel the love and the compassion that goes with what is being said. And Casey made some really great notes. So if you can share some of those thoughts.
Yeah, there's a couple of ways to think about it. First of all, if you're giving feedback that you need to help someone be better, right? At the end of the day, we've got to sit with the mindset that we're fighting for their highest good. Right. So sometimes when we have to say hard things, it feels like we are getting on to people. And we need to reframe what we're saying so that it will reframe how we say it. And so, how do we fight for their highest good? And then let's call people up to the
Mhm.
better way rather than calling them out for the tendency that might have undermined the opportunity, the relationship, or the influence, right? So we need to call people up. The next thing I would say, just for people like Alicia, we can't hint. There's hinting does not work. Clarity is kindness. So be really specific with what the tendency is that is undermining their influence. Like, Dawn just mentioned, and the pastor that spoke to her, under stress, it feels like this is the tendency that sometimes gets in the way that I don't think you understand, right? So he didn't call her out. He said, I'm just bringing awareness to it so that you can pivot, right? So we got to
Yeah.
sit in that space of like, the better way is this, and this is a way that I don't think you see clearly. I had a friend call me this week and said, she's going through a really difficult time in her life. And she said, you know how when people are going through a really difficult time in their life and it's obvious to everybody else what they need to do, but they won't do it? What do I need to do that I don't want to do?
Mm.
And so on the flip side of that, we need to ask other people, what does it feel like to be on the other side of us right now? Because we can feel the tension or we can feel the disconnect. And so sometimes we have to just be humble and walk into the situation and go, what am I not seeing clearly? And what is my part in this? And that takes a lot of humility. And I would say a lot of Holy Spirit guidance to just say, I want to be more Christ-like too. And I think I'm missing the mark. So the way you operate with other people is walk in humility, give deference to them, and like Don's illustration, right? Like, I think under times of stress, it feels like this to other people on the other side of you. I don't think you mean to be that way. So humility on both sides wins the day. Give people deference and then invite people to speak into your life and ask the hard question about, what does it feel like to be on the other side of me right now? Because I think there's a disconnect.
And I will add another way that you can do feedback, if you're not a confrontational person, or if there's somebody you really want feedback from. I took an interpersonal skills class, and we had to send like questionnaire surveys to people that we had different types of relationships with. So I had to send one with a family member, send one to somebody who's known me a long time, sent one to someone who I did not know very long. And the feedback that I got from the person who did not know me very long was so helpful, because it helped me figure out like how I was presenting in new environments. And kudos to her. She like just kind of spit out some things she might never have said in conversation. I might never have known how to bring it up, but given the opportunity to give me feedback, she really did. And it gave me a chance to see on the other side of me, if I just met you, if I have known you a long time, if I'm a part of your family. And so think about what each of those people can give you, and maybe consider letting someone speak to you like digital, like in word form, non-verbally might be helpful. But 360 is powerful, giving people the opportunity to give you feedback all the way around.
Yeah, I think receiving feedback can also be hard for some. And so I think being able to redeem the negative feedback, maybe going back and saying, can you help me to understand where you're coming from with regard to what you said? Because I want to grow and I want to learn. So let's not, especially in the kingdom of God, we don't want to tear each other down. I love what Casey said. Let's call them up, right? But someone may be tearing you down as they're giving you feedback. What do you do with that as a leader? So my encouragement is to go back to them and saying, hey, that was, that came off really hurtful, and maybe that's not what you meant, but clarify some of those things and saying, I really want to learn, and come at it from a learner's perspective. But some of those feedback could be very scarring, especially someone who maybe is not a similar personality to you. I'm thinking of a lot, those of you who do the MBTI. Okay, like those of you who are thinkers, like sometimes the words come off very differently than for those of us who are feelers. And so then we don't hear anything that they're saying because we're so hurt. And so I think coming back and going, can you reword that so that I can understand for growth, and be able to build and not lose a relationship because of one statement that is being said. That helps us to grow and mature as believers. Um, In the last 10 minutes, I want to go over the Q&A actually talks about what we're going to talk about because my last question was like, what books or resources have been instrumental in your growth as a leader? And so I think Kay and Whitney had questions that were similar to that is what are your favorite resources on how to grow as a strategic leader? So similar to that. And the other question was, Alicia mentioned events and possibly resources. Will you mention those again? I definitely will. So I'm going to let everyone share what strategically has been helpful, and I'll mention some of those resources again. And those were
I
the two.
probably have a variety. Oh, go ahead, Dawn. Go ahead, Casey.
You go.
I probably have a little bit of variety in my toolbox. One is a Bible study for me that was life changing was Discerning the Voice of God, Priscilla Shire. I just feel like you always want to hear God's voice when you're leading, and I love that Bible study. Another one is by Emily Dean, Women Leading Well, Stewarding the Gift of Ministry. Having served in ministry for a while, it was a great refresher. It's not a long book, but it has just enough academic aspects to challenge you. But I love it also to share with other women that I'm leading. So it's a nice, easy resource to pick up. I think it takes the conversation up a notch and reminds you of things that were important. And then the third one was the Lifeway Spiritual Gifts Assessment. Being a woman serving in ministry, serving in the local church, we as women, we roll up our sleeves, we serve where we need to, and we can get caught serving in ways that are not our spiritual gift, which are not our passion. And we all talked about this as panelists that when you know where you're gifted and where God is calling you, then it equips you to say yes and no, to set boundaries, and to take on something for just a season. My ministry wife friends out there, we do things. If you're a church planner's wife, you're doing all the things you're doing, but you need to be able to be clear to say, this is not what God has created me to do for the long term, but I will do it for now. And so taking a spiritual gifts assessment and knowing your gifts is really key to growing and leading well for the long term in ministry.
And I'll share a couple. Dear Mighty Things, Mapping the Challenges of Leadership for Christian Women by Haley Grace Scott. Dare Mighty Things was really, really helpful for me. And then a very old classic is Boundaries by Cloud and Townsend. You might have heard it. If you've not read it, I highly recommend it, because in order to grow as a leader and to stay healthy as a leader, you are constantly monitoring your boundaries of your time, your relationships. Should I be doing this? Should I not? Should I stop and do something else? And for some people, that's harder than others. And so Boundaries by Cloud and Townsend, and their secondary book, Safe People, because you're going to encounter all types of women from all types of backgrounds, that you need to be aware of just interpersonal skills and healthiness, emotional healthiness, and how you enter that person's life or not. So Boundaries and Safe People are two other good ones.
I'm going to mention a couple that are not inherently Christian, but one of them has a lot of foundational biblical principles in a very build the bridge kind of way. And it's called the 100X Leader, How to Become Someone Worth Following. And it's the whole premise of what it means to be a healthy leader, and then how do you multiply leadership, healthy leadership to others. So it very much has a discipleship mindset behind it, but it gives a lot of real practical ways to think about your leadership in terms of health is being able to bring healthy challenge and healthy support where other people feel like they can grow, right? We also have been in those environments where people feel dominated, where it's fear and manipulation. So it kind of gives you a framework to think about what does it mean to be healthy and how do you multiply that into others. The other one, somebody asked what were you referring to at the MBTI? It's the Myers-Briggs Type Indicator. And it's a Jungian typology that came about back in the 60s, and it helps you understand the 16 different personalities. The book that kind of is more user-friendly, I would think, that's built around that is what's called the 5 Voices, How to Communicate Effectively with Everyone You Lead. And this book really kind of gives you a specific and detailed way to think about what it feels like to be on the other side of you. Most of the time it's a how we are communicating. So like Alicia said, tone and tact. Man, if you're a thinker, then sometimes you're just saying what you think and other people don't feel like it's friendly. So it's a real practical way to go. What is your God-given personality and what does it feel like to be on the other side of that? So those two are ones that I think are like super practical. Another one that I love in terms of just what it means to be like the spirit field, just spiritual disciplines. Gosh, we could name 1,000 out there. But I think what are we doing? Somebody mentioned Lead by Paul Tripp. I think oh gosh, the Healthy Spirituality by Pete Scazzera. Is that his name?
Yes, that's the one I was going to mention. There's a whole series, Emotionally Healthy Spirituality by
Yeah.
Peter Scazzaro. There's one for women, one for leader, one for church, one for, I mean, there's a whole package, but the one for women or the one where you're doing it for a devotion, that's what I'm doing currently, because that really helps you with your emotional health. That's super helpful. But yeah. Are there others that you wanted to mention? Because I just want to mention a couple as well, if possible. And any Casey, are you good?
Yeah, I'm good.
I didn't want to cut you off. One that I have used for my class, all my leadership class, is a classic. It's Spiritual Leadership by Oswald Chambers. I think he's even passed away. But every student of mine that have ever done that class say, this is so good. It just looks at all aspects of your spiritual walk. And it is probably like a 30-year-old book. It is a long time. When I started in ministry, when I was in my 20s, that was the book that we were all assigned to read. But to this day, even in 2025, my student will pick that up and say that is still one of their favorite. And they're little like 3 pages chapters, but it hits home, like really hard home, even 30 years later, so it's really fascinating to me. Another one is picking something like, Oswald Sanders. I'm so sorry. My utmost for his highest is what I use for my quiet time, and that's Oswald Chambers. Oswald Sanders is the one that does spiritual leadership. Sorry about that. I just saw it right here on my shelf, and I was like, oh no, I said the wrong one. So those are some things. But ladies, one of the other questions, I have 3 minutes left for this time, is I wanted to share some of those resources that I mentioned earlier. So, someone had asked about what are some things that you can do to help you grow. I encourage all of you. You see that You Lead right there on the banner thing. That is a time where you can go to one. There's 9 cities that we're going to, 8 cities now because we just finished one in Columbia, South Carolina. You just need to go onto Lifeway's website. Go under You Lead, or you could put lifeway.com//training. That will take you to a page that has all types of information. You can go to a You Lead, which is a 1-day pre-conference, face-to-face, 8 to 5, I mean 8 to 3:30. You're drinking like from a fire hydrant, okay? Like it is nonstop information. You will have like a challenge message, 3 different breakout sessions options that you can go to. You're going to have like a panel discussion there. It is really fast and furious, okay? And then so that happens all across the US, and it's focused on leadership for women in ministry, whether you're serving in the local church as a children's ministry, a leader, as a women's ministry leader, or even in the marketplace. There's always something that we're always focusing, something for your head, which is biblical literacy, right? Practical ministry, so your hands, and then something for personal equipping for your heart. So in all 3 of those are our vein of what we do in terms of our You Lead leadership conferences, okay? So you can check that. I think Taylor's putting those websites on there. We have blog posts, the Leading Well blog post that's there. Every month you have a new article from either me or Andrea may start contributing to that as well. Andrea, who is the director of Lifeway Women, Andrea Lennon. We have a marked podcast that is going to be talking about things of this area. So we have tons of Bible studies that's always coming out. If you will sign up for Insiders, they will give you a heads up on all of these things that are coming out to maybe a city near you kind of situation. Then we have something that is like you lead on steroid, and that is our forum. And it's like a 2.5 day, I'm sorry, 2 day conference with a lot of our Bible study leaders will come. And there's like 5 general sessions, lots of like 30 breakout sessions there. It's 2 days in Nashville in November. Okay. And so we have that going on. But I didn't know if you knew this, but we actually have you all for this webinar, we have 2 tickets that we're going to give away. So at the end of this session, I'm going to pick from all the participants, those of you who are here live, I'm going to pick one person and give you 2 tickets to join one of our U leads of your choice that's close to you. So that's going to be our prize for this week. And so you want to register for the U lead webinars. The link is right there on the side. Our next webinar, ladies, is actually on May 8th. It's how to navigate disappointment when leaders fail. It is going to be good. So you want to mark your calendars now. You want to come and join live so that you can ask these questions, participate in the chat. But there's a whole webinar series that we would love, and we meet every other month around this time, but it's different. So you can go on the website and check that out. But you want to register for that now. There are also classes that we offer from Lifeway Women Academy. So we're offering like a course, an 8-week course on ethics. A super helpful Lifeway Women Academy is something that is in between, like if you're not ready for seminary, but you want a little bit of training. So we have hermeneutical classes, we have Old Testament survey, New Testament survey, church history, we have practical ministry. We have a lot of different courses there that are being offered for women ministry leaders and any women who want to participate and take those courses. So we have teachers like Elizabeth Woodson, Jen Wilkin on there. We have Courtney VC. We have a ton of people that are teaching in that area. All right, ladies, our time is up. I'm 1 minute over time. So sorry. I think I covered all the question and answer. Michelle, did I miss anything? Taylor, did I miss anything? Let me know, Catherine.
I think we got all we could for today.
All right. Thank you so much, ladies. We'll see you next time. Thank you again. And you all stay safe, stay warm. Okay. And see you next time.
Thank you, ladies.